continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Shattered Glass. Titus Mercer never considered himself an extraordinary man. At 42, he had built a respectable life through sheer tenacity. A successful construction company, a sprawling home in the Pennsylvania countryside, and what he'd always believed was a loving family. His hands, calloused and weathered from years of labor before he moved into management, still carried the strength of someone who understood the value of building things to last. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while he was inspecting a new development site. Raindrops pelted his hard hat as the foreman's voice faded into white noise and his phone vibrated in his pocket. Unknown number. Mr. Mercer? This is Riverview Memorial Hospital. Your daughter Natalie has been in an accident. The world tilted on its axis. Titus remembered little of the drive to the hospital, just fragments of panicked thoughts and the rhythmic slap of windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. By the time he skidded into the emergency entrance, his white button-down was soaked through, clinging to his broad shoulders. Family of Natalie Mercer? A nurse called as he approached the desk. His voice cracked. I'm her father. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly as the nurse led him to the ICU. He'd been trying to reach his wife, Cassandra, for the past hour with no success. That wasn't entirely unusual. As a real estate agent, she often had her phone silenced during showings, but today, her absence felt particularly cutting. Dr. Patel met him outside the ICU, his expression grave beneath salt and pepper hair. Mr. Mercer, your daughter suffered severe head trauma. She was found at the bottom of a ravine off Clayton Ridge Road. Her car appears to have veered off the road and rolled several times before coming to rest nearly 50 feet down. But she's alive. The words felt foreign in Titus's mouth. She stabilized, but I need to be honest with you. Natalie has suffered significant brain injuries. She's currently in a coma, and while we're doing everything we can, the doctor hesitated. There's little chance she'll wake up, and if she does, we can't predict what her cognitive function will be. The room seemed to contract around Titus as he processed those words. 19. His daughter was only 19, a sophomore at Penn State with dreams of becoming a marine biologist. Just last weekend, he'd helped her change the oil in her car, laughing as she insisted on learning how to do it herself. Can I see her? Dr. Patel nodded solemnly. Of course, but prepare yourself. There's extensive bruising and she's on a ventilator. Natalie's room was a symphony of mechanical beeps and hisses. Titus barely recognized the figure in the bed. Face swollen, dark hair shaved in patches to accommodate sutures across her scalp. A tube disappeared into her mouth, forcing air into lungs that seemed unwilling to work on their own. Behind him, the door clicked open. Cassandra rushed in, her face streaked with mascara, blonde hair disheveled. Oh my God, Titus, I just got your messages. Her voice cracked as she looked past him to their daughter. For an inexplicable moment, Titus felt a flicker of something unfamiliar as he watched his wife of 20 years, something that made his skin prickle with unease. She seemed to hesitate before approaching Natalie's bed, her designer heels clicking unnaturally loud against the linoleum floor. Dr. Patel repeated his grim prognosis. Cassandra's shoulders shook with silent sobs, but she remained standing at the foot of the bed, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. I need some air, she whispered eventually, turning toward the door. I can't. I'll be right back. Her abrupt exit left Titus alone in the rhythmic hum of life support machinery. He moved closer to Natalie, carefully taking her limp hand in his. Her fingers felt cold, the silver friendship bracelet he'd given her for her 16th birthday sliding loosely around her wrist. I'm here, sweetheart, he whispered, his throat tight. Dad's right here. And then, so subtle he thought he might have imagined it. Her fingers twitched. Titus froze, afraid to move, afraid to hope. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing a sliver of hazel irises so like his own. Natalie, he breathed, leaning closer. Her lips moved around the ventilator tube, and he had to strain to hear the faint whisper. Dad, the word was barely audible. Please, Save me from Mom and her boyfriend. A chill ran through Titus's body. Before he could process what he'd heard, the door burst open. Cassandra stood there with a tall man Titus had never seen before, ruggedly handsome with expensive clothes and a watch that caught the fluorescent light. The stranger's hand rested on Cassandra's lower back with the casual intimacy of long-standing familiarity. Their eyes met across Natalie's hospital bed, and in that moment, something fundamental shifted in Titus Mercer's world. The stranger's expression changed from concern to recognition, then quickly to guarded calculation. "Titus," Cassandra began, her voice unnaturally high. "This is Damon Ravelli. He works with me. Why call the office about Natalie? He offered to drive me here." Titus said nothing, but he felt it, the first embers of a rage that would soon consume everything in its path. And in that terrible silence, the heart monitor attached to Natalie began to wail as her vitals crashed. That's when it happened, the moment Titus Mercer died, and something else entirely took his place. Chapter 2. Beneath the Surface. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of medical jargon, caffeine, and fractured sleep in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. Natalie had been resuscitated and stabilized, but hadn't regained consciousness since her brief awakening. The neurologist called it a miracle moment. Sometimes coma patients experience temporary periods of lucidity before slipping back under. Titus hadn't mentioned what Natalie had whispered to anyone. Those words had burrowed into his mind like shrapnel, too painful to extract. Cassandra maintained a careful presence at the hospital, always just visible enough to appear the concerned mother, but finding reasons to step out frequently. Phone calls, fresh clothes, consulting with insurance. She and Titus spoke little, the silence between them stretching taut as piano wire. On the fourth day, while Cassandra was away, Titus decided to retrieve Natalie's belongings from her wrecked car, which had been towed to a local impound lot. The attendant led him to what remained of her blue Honda Civic, its frame twisted beyond recognition. "Hell of an accident," the man commented, chewing on a toothpick. "Usually with drop-offs that steep, we're dealing with fatalities." Titus nodded grimly, pulling on work gloves to sift through the wreckage. Most of Natalie's possessions had been removed by first responders, but he wanted to check himself. In the crushed glove compartment, he found her insurance information, a few fast food receipts, and a small journal he didn't recognize, bound in worn leather with her initials embossed on the cover. He hesitated before opening it. Natalie had always been fiercely private about her personal writings, but the memory of her desperate whisper propelled him forward. The journal's early entries were typical teenage musings, classes, friends, a boy she liked in her marine biology program. But the entries from 3 months ago took a darker turn. April 12th. Mom's been acting weird lately. Always on her phone, smiling at texts. When I asked who she was talking to, she nearly jumped out of her skin. April 29th. Caught Mom coming home at 2 a.m. She said she was with work friends, but she was wearing perfume she never wears around Dad. May 17th, I saw them today. Mom and that man from her office. They were at Lakeside Inn. She told Dad she was showing houses in Pittsburgh. They were kissing in the parking lot. Titus's hands trembled as he flipped through more entries, each more damning than the last. The final entry was dated just 2 days before Natalie's accident. June 2nd, I confronted Mom. Told her I knew about her and Damon. She cried, begged me not to tell Dad. Then Damon showed up and everything changed. The way he looked at me, I've never been so scared. He said if I caused problems for them, I'd regret it. Mom just stood there. I'm going to tell Dad everything tomorrow. Tomorrow never came for Natalie. Instead, she'd ended up at the bottom of a ravine. Titus carefully placed the journal in his jacket pocket. Back in his truck, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in nearly 15 years. "Yeah," answered a gruff voice. "Vincent, it's Titus Mercer." A pause. "Holy shit. Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. I need your help," Titus said quietly. Like the old days, before building his legitimate construction business, Titus had worked for Vincent Costello, a man whose building projects often served as fronts for less savory enterprises. They'd parted ways when Titus decided to go straight after Natalie was born. What kind of help we talking about? Vincent asked cautiously. I need information on someone. Deep background. And I need surveillance equipment. The best you've got. This doesn't sound like the Titus Mercer who read me the riot act about going legitimate 15 years ago. Titus stared at the mangled wreckage of his daughter's car. That man doesn't exist anymore. Later that night, as Cassandra slept in their bedroom, Titus methodically placed tiny cameras and microphones throughout their home, in light fixtures behind picture frames beneath end tables. He installed tracking software on Cassandra's phone, her laptop, and her car. Within 24 hours, Vincent had delivered a comprehensive file on Damon Ravelli. Damon wasn't just a real estate colleague. He was the regional director of Cassandra's firm, with a reputation for aggressive business tactics and a string of wealthy divorcees in his wake. 3 previous marriages, each ending when he moved on to a more advantageous connection. His finances showed evidence of living beyond his means, with significant debt hidden beneath a veneer of success. Most importantly, Damon owned a black Range Rover with recently repaired front-end damage. The repair had been done at a small garage for cash. No insurance claim filed. The date of repair, the day after Natalie's accident. By the end of the week, Titus had compiled enough surveillance footage to confirm what he already knew. Cassandra and Damon were indeed having an affair. They communicated in coded text messages, met while Titus was at work, and had even used the guest bedroom of his own home when they thought Natalie was at school. But the most damning evidence came from a conversation captured in Cassandra's car 3 days after Natalie's accident. She remembered Damon. She tried to tell him, "That's impossible. She was unconscious when we left her." The doctor said sometimes coma patients have moments of awareness. What if she wakes up and tells Titus everything? She won't wake up. The doctor said so himself. And if by some miracle she does, it'll be her word against ours. A brain-damaged teenager making wild accusations. Who would believe her? I never wanted this. You said you were just going to scare her. She was going to ruin everything. Our plans, our future. She gave us no choice. Titus listened to the recording 3 times, each replay crystallizing his resolve. They had run his daughter off the road and left her to die. And now they were sleeping under his roof, spending his money, waiting for him to comfort Cassandra in her grief while they planned their future together. That night, as he sat beside Natalie's hospital bed, watching the mechanical rise and fall of her chest, Titus made his decision. There would be no police, no courts, no chance for them to twist the narrative. Instead, there would be justice, cold, precise, and without mercy. He leaned forward and whispered in his daughter's ear, "I heard you, sweetheart, and I'm going to save you. I promise." Chapter 3. The Architect of Pain. The next morning, Titus called his company's operations manager and arranged an extended leave of absence. Family emergency, he explained. Could be weeks, maybe longer. He transferred project oversight responsibilities and authorized his second-in-command to handle all financial decisions in his absence. Next, he visited his lawyer under the guise of updating his will in light of Natalie's condition. While there, he quietly transferred most of his liquid assets to new accounts under a holding company Vincent had helped him establish. He made no changes to his actual will. That would come later when the time was right. At home, he maintained a facade of grim determination focused solely on Natalie's recovery. Cassandra seemed relieved by his emotional distance, interpreting it as shock rather than calculated restraint. "The doctors are suggesting we look into long-term care facilities," she mentioned over a dinner she'd barely touched. "Just in case." Titus set down his fork. "In case what, Cassandra?" She shifted uncomfortably. "In case she doesn't wake up soon." Dr. Patel said, "We need to be realistic about our prospects." "My daughter will receive the best care possible for as long as it takes," he replied evenly. "I've already arranged for a private specialist from Johns Hopkins to consult on her case." This was news to Cassandra, whose smile faltered. "Oh, I didn't realize. That must be expensive. Does the cost of our daughter's life concern you?" "Of course not," she backpedaled quickly. "I just meant, with you taking time off work. Money isn't an issue. His voice was ice. We have savings. The savings she thought they had, anyway. In reality, Titus had been systematically reallocating their joint assets, leaving just enough in their accounts to avoid suspicion. The substantial emergency fund Cassandra believed they maintained had already been moved into accounts she couldn't access. That night, he followed her to what had become a regular rendezvous, an upscale apartment complex on the other side of town. From his parked car down the street, he watched through binoculars as she entered a ground-floor unit. Property records showed the apartment belonged to one of Damon's shell companies. While they were occupied, Titus used the key he had made to enter Damon's actual residence, a modernist glass and steel structure overlooking the river. He moved methodically through the house, placing surveillance devices identical to those in his own home. In Damon's home office, he found a locked cabinet that yielded easily to the picks Vincent had supplied. Inside was a treasure trove, offshore account information, evidence of tax evasion, and most significantly, a folder labeled Acquisition Strategy, Mercer Construction. The documentation revealed a plan dating back 8 months, detailing how Damon had targeted Cassandra specifically to gain leverage over Titus's company, which owned valuable land parcels Damon's development group coveted. Titus photographed everything before carefully replacing it exactly as he'd found it. By the time he left, Damon's home was wired for round-the-clock surveillance, and Titus had enough information to destroy him financially. But that would be too simple, too clean. What he had in mind would hurt much more. The following week brought a breakthrough in Natalie's condition. Her brain activity had increased, and doctors were cautiously optimistic about reducing her sedation to see if she might regain consciousness. Titus arranged for a private security guard to be stationed outside her room at all times, with explicit instructions that Cassandra and Damon were never to be left alone with her. "Don't you think that's excessive?" Cassandra asked when she noticed the guard. "Who would want to hurt Natalie?" Titus gave her a long, measured look. "I'm not taking any chances with her safety. Not after everything that's happened." Fear flickered across Cassandra's face, the first indication that she suspected he might know more than he was letting on. Good. He wanted her afraid. Fear was just the beginning of what she deserved. With Natalie's security ensured, Titus moved to the next phase of his plan. He contacted Damon directly, suggesting a meeting to discuss mutual business interests. The call caught Damon off guard, but his ambition overrode his caution. They arranged to meet at a restaurant owned by an associate of Vincent's, a place where privacy was guaranteed and surveillance footage could conveniently malfunction if necessary. Damon arrived 15 minutes late, his confidence palpable as he slid into the booth across from Titus. "I was surprised to hear from you," he said, adjusting his designer tie. "Cassandra mentioned you've been preoccupied with Natalie's situation." "A father's responsibility never ends," Titus replied calmly. "But life goes on, doesn't it? Business continues." "Absolutely. Business is the one constant we can count on." Titus slid a folder across the table. "I understand you have an interest in certain properties my company controls." Damon's eyes widened slightly as he scanned the documents, exact copies of the acquisition plans from his locked cabinet. "Where did you get these?" "I make it my business to know when someone's plotting against me," Titus said, his voice deceptively light. "Just as I make it my business to know when someone's sleeping with my wife." All color drained from Damon's face. He glanced toward the exit, calculating his options. "Don't worry," Titus continued. "If I wanted to hurt you, we wouldn't be having this conversation in public." "What do you want?" Titus leaned forward. "I want to offer you a deal. The properties you're after, I'll sell them to you at 15% below market value." Confusion replaced fear on Damon's face. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm done with this life. My company, my marriage, it's all compromised. I want out clean, with enough money to start over somewhere else with Natalie when she recovers." He paused deliberately. "If she recovers." The implication hung between them. Damon shifted uncomfortably, but couldn't resist the bait. "And Cassandra? She's made her choice. She can have the divorce settlement and whatever future you're offering her." "I don't care anymore." Relief washed over Damon's features, exactly as Titus had anticipated. Predators like Damon couldn't conceive of a man willingly walking away from what they coveted. It had to be a trap, yet the potential reward was too great to ignore. I'll need to review the numbers, consult with my investors, Damon hedged. Of course. Titus stood and dropped cash on the table for his untouched drink. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, I'm entertaining other offers. As he walked away, Titus knew with absolute certainty that Damon would take the deal. Greed would override his suspicions, just as it had led him to target Cassandra in the first place. Later that night, as expected, surveillance picked up Damon's excited call to Cassandra. He knows, but he doesn't care. He's giving up. Wants out of everything, including you. We're getting exactly what we wanted, and it's going to be even easier than we planned. Cassandra's response was less enthusiastic. It doesn't make sense. Titus doesn't just give up on things. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. This is our chance, everything we've been working toward. Titus smiled grimly as he listened. The first pieces of his design were falling into place, a blueprint for destruction that would leave nothing of their lives intact. By the time he was finished, they would understand exactly what it meant to awaken the architect of pain. Chapter 4. The Hollow Men. Titus established a routine that became familiar to the hospital staff, arriving at dawn, sitting with Natalie until evening, then leaving reluctantly at the nurse's insistence. What no one realized was how he spent those nighttime hours away from his daughter's bedside. In a warehouse owned by his construction company, Titus had created a command center. Multiple monitors displayed surveillance feeds from his home, Damon's residence, their offices, and their vehicles. Detailed timelines covered one wall, tracking their movements, communications, and plans. Another wall held financial records, property documents, and personal information on everyone in their orbit. Vincent visited occasionally, bringing equipment or information, each time leaving with a growing concern for his old friend's state of mind. This isn't just about revenge anymore, is it? Vincent asked one night, watching Titus methodically sort through Damon's banking records. It was never just about revenge, Titus replied without looking up. It's about justice, and justice requires precision. The deal for the properties progressed quickly. Damon, eager to capitalize on Titus's apparent surrender, had arranged financing within 36 hours. Documents were drawn up for the sale of 3 key parcels of land, the cornerstones of a major development that would reshape the downtown riverfront area. What Damon didn't know was that those properties carried hidden liabilities. Titus had spent the past week fabricating evidence of soil contamination, creating falsified environmental reports showing dangerous levels of industrial chemicals requiring millions in remediation. The documentation looked impeccable, backed by soil samples that would indeed test positive when Damon inevitably ordered his own analysis after the purchase. Simultaneously, Titus had been cultivating a relationship with Preston Hargrove, Damon's primary financial backer. A cautious man with old money and older principles, Preston had been hesitant about investing in Damon's latest venture. Titus arranged a chance meeting at their shared golf club, carefully steering the conversation toward local development. I heard you're backing Ravelli on the riverfront project, Titus mentioned casually as they approached the 9th hole. Bold move. Preston frowned. You know about that? I thought your company controlled those parcels. Not for much longer. Titus's drive sailed down the fairway, selling them to Damon at a discount. A discount. Preston's suspicion was evident. Why would you do that? Personal reasons. Titus shrugged. Let's just say I'm motivated to disentangle certain aspects of my life. Heard about your daughter. Terrible thing. Preston's eyes narrowed slightly. Damon mentioned he's been supporting your wife through it all. Seems involved. I'm sure he has, Titus replied neutrally. Preston was silent for a moment, then, forgive my bluntness, but something doesn't add up here. You're one of the shrewdest businessmen I know. You wouldn't sell prime real estate at a loss without a compelling reason. Perhaps I have one. Titus met his gaze steadily. But it's not what you're thinking. Those properties are worth exactly what I'm selling them for. No more, no less. The deliberate ambiguity had the intended effect. By the time they finished their round, Preston was visibly uneasy about his investment. Titus knew the seed of doubt had been planted. Preston would start looking more closely at Damon's proposal, asking harder questions, demanding greater transparency. That evening, surveillance captured an increasingly agitated Damon on the phone with Preston, defending the investment opportunity and promising additional documentation to address unfounded concerns. Phase 1 was working perfectly. Pressure applied in just the right places would eventually reveal the structural weaknesses in Damon's carefully constructed facade. Meanwhile, Cassandra had grown increasingly nervous about Titus's apparent detachment. He maintained a cold civility at home, speaking to her only when necessary, mostly about Natalie's condition. His indifference confused her. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected from the passionate, sometimes volatile man she'd married. One night, she cornered him in his home office. "We need to talk, Titus. About us. About what happens next." He looked up from his laptop with empty eyes. "What would you like to discuss?" "You've been different. Since Natalie's accident. Distant. My priority is our daughter." Cassandra hesitated, then pressed on. "And after she recovers? What about our marriage? Is that something you're concerned about?" "Our marriage?" The question was delivered with such flatness that it made her flinch. "Of course it is. We've been together 20 years. Titus closed his laptop. Damon mentioned the property deal is going forward. "Congratulations. It's quite an achievement to secure such valuable assets below market value." The color drained from her face. "You know, about the affair, or about how you plan to use it to help him acquire my company's holdings?" He stood slowly. "Or perhaps you mean I know about what happened to Natalie, how she confronted you about your relationship, how she threatened to tell me everything, how Damon ran her off the road to silence her." Cassandra backed toward the door. "It wasn't like that. There was an argument, yes, but the accident wasn't an accident at all." Titus's voice remained eerily calm. "Damon's Range Rover had front-end damage repaired the day after Natalie's accident. There were black paint transfers on her car consistent with a larger vehicle. And then there's her journal, where she detailed everything, including how she planned to tell me about your betrayal the day she ended up in a ravine instead." "Titus, please. I've filed for divorce," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The papers will be delivered tomorrow. You'll find the terms quite generous, considering the circumstances. The house, a reasonable settlement. More than enough to start over, though perhaps not with Damon. His financial situation is about to become complicated." Tears streamed down Cassandra's face. "You don't understand. Damon said it was just a scare tactic. He never meant to hurt her so badly. We were going to tell you about us after, find a way to make it work for everyone. By taking everything I built, by leaving my daughter for dead at the bottom of a ravine." For the first time, a flash of the rage beneath his controlled exterior showed through. "The only reason you're still standing here, still breathing the same air as me, is because I need you exactly where you are for a little while longer." "What does that mean?" Real fear entered her voice. "It means you should enjoy the life you've chosen, Cassandra, while you still can." She fled the room, and within minutes, surveillance showed her frantically calling Damon, who instructed her to pack essentials and come to his apartment immediately. Titus smiled faintly. Everything was proceeding according to design. Let them run. Let them hide together, consolidating their betrayal in one convenient location. It only made his work easier. 2 days later, as Titus sat beside Natalie, her fingers twitched, then her eyelids fluttered. The neurologist was called, and after a series of tests, delivered cautiously optimistic news. She was emerging from the coma. Recovery would be slow, with potential complications, but the worst appeared to be behind her. That night, Titus visited a safety deposit box he'd established using one of his new shell companies. Inside was documented evidence of Damon and Cassandra's involvement in Natalie's accident. The journal, surveillance recordings, forensic analysis of the vehicle damage, witness statements he'd carefully gathered from people along Natalie's route that day. He removed everything except the journal. That he would keep close, a reminder of why he'd set all this in motion. The following morning, he contacted Detective Lowell Bryant, an old acquaintance who'd risen through the ranks of the local police department. They met at a diner far from both their usual haunts. "This is quite a story," Bryant said after reviewing the evidence. "Why bring it to me instead of filing an official report?" Because I need someone who understands that justice and law aren't always perfectly aligned, Titus replied. I'm not asking you to arrest them. Not yet. I'm asking you to be ready when the time comes. Bryant studied him carefully. What exactly are you planning, Titus? Nothing illegal. Nothing that would compromise your position. It wasn't entirely a lie. The most damning aspects of his plan would never be traced back to him. But when everything falls apart for them, and it will, I want someone honest handling the case. Someone who won't be bought off or misdirected. After a long moment, Bryant nodded. I'll keep this information secure. But Titus, don't cross lines you can't come back from. Your daughter needs you whole, not in prison. I appreciate your concern, Titus said, standing to leave. But some lines were already crossed the moment they left my daughter to die. As he walked away, his phone chimed with a text from Vincent. It's done. Systems in place. Timeline active. Phase 2 was complete. Now came the waiting and the watching. Chapter 5. Pressure Points. 3 weeks after their midnight flight from the Mercer household, Cassandra and Damon had settled into an uneasy rhythm in his sleek riverside apartment. The divorce proceedings moved forward without contest from Titus, who had indeed offered terms far more generous than expected. Cassandra received the house, a substantial cash settlement, and various personal assets, while Titus retained his business holdings, including the properties slated for sale to Damon's development group. On the surface, everything was proceeding smoothly. The sale would close in 10 days. Preston Hargrove, despite his initial hesitation, had been reassured by additional environmental assessments provided by Damon's team. Assessments Titus knew had been performed by a compromised firm working with falsified baseline data. Beneath this veneer of progress, however, Titus was systematically increasing pressure on multiple fronts. Small, seemingly unrelated incidents began to plague Damon's personal and professional life. His primary banking relationship faltered when irregularities were discovered in his accounts. A routine audit of his real estate firm uncovered licensing discrepancies that required immediate attention. His ex-wife suddenly contested their divorce settlement, citing new evidence of hidden assets. None of these issues was catastrophic in isolation, but together they created a constant state of crisis management that prevented Damon from focusing fully on the riverfront acquisition, exactly as Titus had planned. Meanwhile, Natalie continued her remarkable recovery. Though still weak and suffering memory gaps, she had regained consciousness and begun physical therapy. Titus rarely left her side during waking hours, coordinating his operation from a laptop while she rested. He brought in the best neurologists and rehabilitation specialists, sparing no expense for her care. One afternoon, as Natalie dozed after an exhausting therapy session, her phone, recovered from the accident and kept charged by Titus, lit up with a text message from Cassandra. I heard you're awake. We need to talk. Please don't tell your father about this message. Titus read it dispassionately, then typed a reply that would sound like his daughter. Not ready to talk yet. Still confused about what happened. He needed Cassandra anxious, but not panicked. Worried enough to make mistakes, but not desperate enough to flee before his plan culminated. That evening, he met with Preston Hargrove at the investor's sprawling estate outside the city. Preston had requested the meeting away from business associates and potential eavesdroppers. I've been doing some digging, Preston said as they walked through his meticulously maintained gardens. About Damon. About the accident involving your daughter. His expression was grave. There are troubling inconsistencies in the timing of events. Titus said nothing, letting the silence draw more from Preston. Damon claimed to be in Pittsburgh the day of the accident, meeting with potential investors. But expense receipts show he was much closer, less than 5 miles from where your daughter's car went off the road. Preston stopped walking. I don't like being lied to, Titus. And I don't do business with people who harm children. What are you suggesting? I'm pulling my backing from the Riverfront project. Quietly, for now. I've told Damon I need to review final assessments before releasing funds, but the truth is, I won't be releasing them at all. Preston's eyes narrowed. What I can't figure out is your angle. If you suspect what I suspect, why sell to him at all? Why not go to the police? Titus considered his words carefully. Preston was more perceptive than he'd anticipated, which presented both risk and opportunity. Evidence and justice aren't always perfectly aligned, he finally said. Sometimes the system protects the wrong people. Sometimes other measures are necessary. Understanding dawned on Preston's face. You're setting him up. I'm ensuring he receives exactly what he deserves. Titus met his gaze steadily. Nothing more, nothing less. After a moment, Preston nodded slowly. The Riverfront project is dead without my backing. Damon doesn't know it yet, but he's lost everything he was counting on. And your investment? I'll survive the loss. Some things are more important than money. Preston extended his hand. For what it's worth, Titus, I believe you're doing what any father would do in your position. Titus accepted the handshake. Be careful, Preston. Damon will be desperate when he realizes what's happening. Desperate men are unpredictable. I can handle Damon Ravelli, Preston assured him. My concern is for you. Whatever you're planning, don't lose yourself in it. Vengeance has a way of consuming those who seek it. This isn't vengeance, Titus replied quietly. It's reckoning. When Titus returned to the hospital that night, he found Natalie awake and more lucid than she'd been since emerging from a coma. She clutched his hand as he sat beside her bed. Dad? She whispered, her voice still weak. I remember parts of what happened. You don't need to talk about it now, he said gently. Rest. She shook her head stubbornly. Need to tell you. Mom and that man, Damon, they were having an affair. I found out, confronted her. Then I saw his car following me on Clayton Ridge Road. He drove up behind me, so close. I was scared, tried to speed up. Then he hit me from behind. I remember spinning, screaming, then nothing. Titus fought to maintain his composure. I know, sweetheart. I found your journal. Tears filled her eyes. Mom just watched it happen. She was in the passenger seat. She didn't try to stop him. This was new information, more damning than even Titus had realized. Cassandra hadn't just been complicit after the fact. She'd been present during the attack itself. I promise you, Natalie, he said, his voice low and resolute, they will never hurt you again. I'm handling it. What does that mean? Worry creased her brow. Dad, don't do anything crazy. I don't want you to get in trouble because of them. He smiled reassuringly. There won't be any trouble. Just justice. He squeezed her hand. Focus on getting better. That's all that matters right now. Later, as Natalie slept, Titus updated his timeline with this new information. Cassandra's direct involvement changed certain aspects of his plan, making some measures unnecessary and others more justified. He sent a coded message to Vincent. Accelerate Phase 3. Target Echo directly implicated. Vincent's response came quickly. Confirmed. Assets in position. 48-hour window begins at midnight. The next morning, Titus made a show of visiting his lawyer's office, ensuring he was seen by several people who knew both him and Damon. Afterward, he visited the bank where the property transaction would be finalized, spending an hour with the manager reviewing documents. Again, he made certain his presence was noted by staff who might mention it to interested parties. These movements were deliberate, creating a public narrative of a man focused on business matters, not revenge. It also served to increase Damon's anxiety. Surveillance showed him making frantic calls to determine exactly what Titus was doing, what he might know, what countermeasures might be necessary. By evening, Damon had called an emergency meeting with his remaining investors, trying to secure alternate financing to replace Preston's suddenly unavailable funds. Cassandra, meanwhile, had begun quietly researching property values in distant cities, as if preparing for another hasty departure. They were feeling the pressure. Soon, very soon, something would break. That night, as Titus monitored surveillance feeds from his warehouse command center, Vincent arrived with a thin folder. Final confirmation, Vincent said, sliding it across the table. Soil samples tested positive for exactly what we planted. The environmental report drops tomorrow morning. DEP will issue a cease and desist on any development of those parcels pending a full investigation. Titus nodded. And the financial matter? In place. Offshore accounts emptied, transactions rerouted through Damon's personal holdings. Wire transfers all tagged with his authentication codes. When the auditors look, they'll find exactly what you want them to find. Perfect timing. The property closing is scheduled for noon tomorrow. Vincent studied his friend's impassive face. This goes beyond ruining them financially, doesn't it? Titus finally looked up from the surveillance monitors. They left my daughter to die, Vincent. Financial ruin is just the beginning of what they deserve. I've known you a long time, Vincent said carefully. Seen you angry. Seen you hurt people who crossed you. But this is different. There's something cold about it. Cold is exactly what's needed. Titus turned back to the screens. Emotion leads to mistakes. I can't afford mistakes. Vincent sighed. The packages will be delivered as arranged. Untraceable as promised. But Titus, once this is done, you need to let it go. For Natalie's sake, if not your own. After Vincent left, Titus continued his vigil, watching Damon and Cassandra move through their increasingly frantic evening routine. They argued, made desperate phone calls, drank too much, argued again. Their world was already crumbling, and they didn't even realize the full extent of what was coming. Tomorrow would change everything. The carefully constructed dominoes were all in place, ready to fall in a cascade of destruction that would leave nothing of their lives intact. Titus closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Then he returned to his preparations. The architect's work was nearly complete. Chapter 6. The Closing. The morning of the property closing dawned with a clarity that seemed almost purposeful. Bright sunshine illuminating a world about to shift on its axis. Titus dressed carefully in his best suit, the picture of a successful businessman concluding an important transaction. At the hospital, he spent an hour with Natalie, whose improvement continued to impress her doctors. She'd begun asking more questions about what would happen to her mother and Damon, expressing concern about potential legal consequences. "Let me worry about that," Titus assured her. "Today's a big day for the business. Once it's done, I'll explain everything." Before leaving, he confirmed with the private security team that protocols remained in place. No visitors except approved medical personnel and himself. He maintained this restriction despite Cassandra's increasingly desperate attempts to see Natalie, claiming maternal rights and threatening legal action. At 11, Titus arrived at Bergen National Bank, where the closing was scheduled. Damon was already there, looking haggard but masking it beneath forced confidence. Cassandra sat beside him, elegant in a blue dress that Titus recognized. He'd bought it for their anniversary the previous year. "Titus," Damon extended his hand, which Titus ignored. "We're all set on our end. Just waiting on final wire confirmation from our backers." "Of course," Titus replied mildly, knowing the confirmation would never come. Preston had officially withdrawn all financial support the previous day, leaving Damon scrambling for replacement funding that didn't exist. The bank's conference room filled with various representatives, attorneys, title company officials, bank officers. Cassandra avoided Titus's gaze, focusing intently on her phone as if expecting an urgent message. At 11:45, Damon's phone rang. He stepped out to take the call, returning moments later with a sheen of perspiration on his forehead. "We need to delay by an hour," he announced. "Minor wire transfer issue." The bank officer frowned. "The room is only reserved until 1. We have another closing scheduled after yours." "It won't take that long," Damon insisted. "Just a technical glitch at our lender's end." Titus checked his watch. "I have another appointment at 2. Perhaps we should reschedule for tomorrow if your financing isn't in order." Panic flashed across Damon's face. "No, the funds are committed. It's just a timing issue." As they argued logistics, Cassandra's phone chimed with a news alert. She gasped audibly, drawing everyone's attention. "What is it?" Damon demanded. She turned the phone toward him, showing a breaking news headline. "Major environmental contamination discovered at proposed riverfront development site." The color drained from Damon's face as he read further. "This is impossible. We had the sites tested repeatedly." "Perhaps not thoroughly enough," Titus suggested. "Industrial contamination can be tricky, often concentrated in specific areas that might be missed by standard sampling." The bank officer cleared his throat. "In light of this development, I'm afraid we'll need to postpone this transaction pending further investigation." Environmental liabilities of this nature would significantly impact the property valuation and potential usage permissions. Damon's phone rang again, his attorney, calling about the news. As he stepped out to take the call, Cassandra finally met Titus's gaze. "You did this," she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. "Somehow you did this." Titus merely smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "I'm merely selling property at fair market value," which, considering the newly discovered contamination, appears to be considerably less than previously thought. Before she could respond, the conference room door burst open. Two men in suits entered, flanking a stern-faced woman who flashed a federal badge. "Damon Ravelli?" she asked, looking around the room. "He stepped out to take a call," the bank officer replied, confused. "You should be right back." "And Cassandra Mercer?" Cassandra froze. "That's me. What is this about?" "I'm Special Agent Diana Frost with the Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for Mr. Ravelli's arrest on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion." She turned to Cassandra. "We also have some questions for you regarding certain transactions through offshore accounts bearing your digital signature." Panic bloomed across Cassandra's face. "There must be some mistake. I don't have offshore accounts. According to our records, you're a co-signer on accounts in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein, through which approximately $12 million has been funneled over the past 8 months. Agent Frost consulted her tablet. "Most recently, a transfer of $2.4 million yesterday afternoon, authorized with your credentials." "That's not possible." Cassandra looked wildly around the room, her gaze finally settling on Titus, who watched the proceedings with apparent surprise that didn't quite mask the satisfaction beneath. At that moment, Damon returned, stopping short at the sight of the federal agents. "What's going on here?" "Mr. Ravelli, you're under arrest," Agent Frost began, nodding to her colleagues who moved toward him. "You have the right to remain silent." What followed was controlled chaos. Damon shouting about a setup, Cassandra tearfully proclaiming her ignorance of any financial crimes, bank officials hurriedly clearing the room of other personnel. Throughout it all, Titus remained seated, the eye of the storm, watching as the first major phase of his plan unfolded exactly as designed. The falsified financial evidence he'd arranged through Vincent's connections was flawless, digital trails leading directly to Damon and Cassandra, implicating them in a complex scheme of fraud and money laundering that had never actually occurred. By the time Damon was handcuffed and led from the room, with Cassandra following for questioning, the property closing was officially canceled. Titus gathered his documents calmly, nodding politely to the flustered bank officials as he departed. Outside, he paused to watch as Damon was placed in an unmarked federal vehicle. Their eyes met briefly through the window, Damon's filled with rage and bewilderment, Titus's cold and implacable. But this was merely the beginning. Financial ruin and federal charges were just the foundation of his design. The true reckoning was yet to come. Back at his warehouse command center, Titus monitored the aftermath. News of Damon's arrest spread quickly through business circles. By evening, his development company's stock had plummeted. Board members were calling emergency meetings. Financial backers were distancing themselves publicly. Cassandra had been released after questioning, but remained under investigation. Surveillance showed her returning to Damon's apartment, frantically packing essentials, clearly planning to flee. Exactly as anticipated, Titus picked up his phone and dialed Detective Bryant. "It's time," he said simply when Bryant answered. "She's packing to run." "You're sure about this?" Bryant asked, his tone grave. "Completely." Natalie provided her full statement today, confirmed that both Damon and Cassandra were in the vehicle that ran her off the road. "She's prepared to testify." That much was true. What Bryant didn't know was how Titus had helped shape and solidify Natalie's fragmented memories, filling gaps with details from his own investigation until she believed with absolute certainty that she'd seen her mother in Damon's car during the attack. "I'll assemble a team," Bryant said. "We'll move within the hour." Titus ended the call and leaned back in his chair, surveying the monitors before him. On one screen, Cassandra threw clothing into suitcases. On another, federal agents combed through Damon's office. On a third, news coverage of the environmental scandal played on repeat. The dominoes were falling precisely as he'd arranged them. But the final, most devastating collapse was still to come. The true reckoning that would ensure neither Cassandra nor Damon would ever recover, even if they somehow evaded legal consequences. Because Titus Mercer had designed a punishment far worse than prison, far more permanent than financial ruin. He had designed their complete and irrevocable destruction, and the blueprint was flawless. Chapter 7. House of Cards. By midnight, Cassandra had been arrested on charges of attempted murder and conspiracy related to Natalie's accident. Detective Bryant personally led the team that took her into custody as she attempted to board a private charter flight arranged under a false name. Her tearful protests of innocence fell on deaf ears as Bryant recited the evidence against her, including Natalie's statement and forensic data linking Damon's vehicle to the scene. Damon, already in federal custody on the financial charges, was served with additional warrants related to the attempted murder. His high-priced attorney, summoned from New York at exorbitant after-hours rates, looked increasingly grim as the evidence mounted. Titus followed these developments through his police contacts and news reports, maintaining physical distance while orchestrating each devastating revelation. To the outside world, he appeared solely focused on Natalie's recovery, spending every day at the hospital as she grew stronger. He gave no interviews, made no public statements about the arrests. His silence lent gravity to the proceedings, the dignified restraint of a father concerned only with his daughter's welfare. 5 days after the arrests, Preston Hargrove visited Titus at the hospital. They spoke quietly in the cafeteria while Natalie underwent physical therapy. The development company is filing for bankruptcy, Preston informed him. The board voted to remove Damon as CEO, but it won't matter. Between the environmental contamination, the federal charges, and now the attempted murder case, no one will touch those riverfront properties. Unfortunate, Titus remarked mildly. Preston studied him with shrewd eyes. I'm curious about something. Those properties never had contamination issues in previous assessments. What changed? Titus sipped his coffee, neither confirming nor denying the implication. Environmental science is complex. Sometimes things are buried deep, only emerging when you know exactly where to look. Indeed, Preston nodded slowly. Well, whatever the truth, the result seems appropriate given the circumstances. He paused. There are rumors that federal investigators found evidence linking Damon and your wife to other crimes, blackmail, fraud going back years. Is it you're doing as well? I merely provided information to the appropriate authorities, Titus replied. What they discovered in their investigation is beyond my knowledge. This wasn't entirely true. Through Vincent's connections, Titus had arranged for federal agents to find evidence of previous criminal activities, some real, uncovered through extensive background research, others fabricated so convincingly they would withstand scrutiny. Preston seemed satisfied with this answer. Their preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. Bail has been denied for both of them, given the flight risk. He hesitated. I understand your need for justice, Titus. But at some point, this has to end. For your sake, and for Natalie's. It ends when they've paid fully for what they did, Titus said, his voice hardening slightly. Not before. That afternoon, after Preston left, Titus received a call from an unknown number. He stepped into the hospital hallway to answer it. Mr. Mercer, a woman's voice, cultured and precise. My name is Eleanor Ravelli. I believe you know my son, Damon. Titus's grip tightened on the phone. Damon's mother, a formidable figure he'd researched extensively. Wealthy in her own right, with political connections and a reputation for protecting her family at all costs. Mrs. Ravelli, what can I do for you? You can stop this vindictive crusade against my son, she said coldly. Whatever grievances you have, there are more civilized ways to resolve them. Your son ran my daughter off the road and left her to die, Titus replied evenly. There's nothing civilized about that. Allegations without merit. Damon has explained everything. Your wife's affair, your financial troubles, your desperate attempt to frame him rather than accept the failure of your marriage and business. Her tone was dismissive. I've engaged the best criminal defense team on the East Coast. This charade will collapse under proper scrutiny. Feel free to invest in whatever legal defense you prefer, Titus said. The evidence speaks for itself. Does it? A note of dangerous calculation entered her voice. I wonder what evidence might emerge about your own past, Mr. Mercer. Your association with Vincent Costello, for instance. The questionable foundations of your early construction projects. Perhaps even your recent activities, fabricating evidence, manipulating financial records. Titus had anticipated this approach. Interesting theory. Difficult to prove, especially when weighed against forensic evidence of your son's vehicle striking my daughter's car. Eyewitness testimony placing him at the scene, and your son's own girlfriend confirming his involvement. Witnesses can recant. Evidence can be discredited, and distractions can be created. The threat was unmistakable. I'm prepared to offer a reasonable settlement, enough to cover your daughter's medical expenses and provide comfortable compensation for any inconvenience. You think you can buy your son's freedom? Titus almost laughed. You don't understand what's happening here, Mrs. Ravelli. This isn't a negotiation. There is no settlement amount, no arrangement, no deal that can stop what's coming. You're making a grave mistake, she warned. I have resources you can't imagine, connections in places you've never heard of. If you continue down this path, you won't be the only one to suffer consequences. Threaten me again, Titus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, and you'll discover exactly how far I'm willing to go. He ended the call and immediately contacted Vincent, alerting him to the new complication. Eleanor Ravelli was dangerous, perhaps more so than her son. She would need to be neutralized before she could interfere with the final phase of his plan. Vincent promised to handle it, refusing to share details that might implicate Titus. Plausible deniability, he insisted. Just focus on Natalie, and let me worry about Mama Ravelli. The next morning, news broke that Eleanor Ravelli had been taken into custody by federal agents investigating a decades-old art smuggling operation. Photographs of priceless artifacts recovered from her home splashed across media outlets. Anonymous sources claimed evidence had been delivered to authorities by a disgruntled former employee. Titus allowed himself a small, grim smile. Another piece removed from the board. As the preliminary hearing approached, Titus methodically tied up loose ends. He arranged for the journal and other physical evidence to be delivered to the prosecution through proper channels. He coached Natalie gently on her testimony, emphasizing the importance of absolute certainty in her identification of both Damon and Cassandra in the vehicle that ran her off the road. Vincent reported that all digital evidence had been secured, the falsified financial records untraceable to their true source, the surveillance equipment removed from all locations, the warehouse command center dismantled and sanitized. The case against Damon and Cassandra appeared airtight. Between Natalie's testimony, the forensic evidence, and the financial paper trail suggesting motive, conviction seemed inevitable. The prosecution was already hinting at potential sentences, 20 to 30 years for attempted murder, with additional time for the financial crimes. But Titus knew the legal system was unpredictable. Skilled attorneys, sympathetic jurors, procedural technicalities. Any of these could result in reduced charges or even acquittal. And that was a risk he was unwilling to take. The night before the preliminary hearing, Titus executed the final phase of his plan. The most dangerous phase, the one he'd entrusted to no one, not even Vincent. Using credentials obtained through his investigations, Titus accessed the county detention center where Damon was being held. A guard who owed Vincent a significant favor escorted him to a secured interview room, then conveniently experienced equipment failure on the surveillance system. When Damon was brought in, handcuffed and wearing orange prison scrubs, his shock at seeing Titus quickly transformed into seething hatred. "Come to gloat," Damon spat, dropping heavily into the metal chair across the table. Titus studied him dispassionately. "I came to inform you personally that your mother has been arrested. Federal charges related to art smuggling. Quite serious, from what I understand." All color drained from Damon's face. "That's impossible. She's been retired for years. Apparently not retired enough. Evidence delivered anonymously. Very compelling, according to my sources. "You son of a bitch," Damon whispered, comprehension dawning. "You did this. All of it. The contamination report, the financial records, now my mother." "You tried to kill my daughter," Titus replied calmly. "Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Damon leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "It was an accident. We were just trying to scare her, make her understand she needed to keep quiet about me and Cassandra. I never meant to run her off the road. Yet you did. And when you saw what happened, you left her there to die." "We panicked," Damon hissed. "I checked her pulse. She was alive. I called 911 anonymously once we were away from the scene." "After ensuring your own safety first," Titus observed coldly. "After making sure there were no witnesses to connect you to what happened." Damon slumped back in his chair. "What do you want from me? A confession? Fine. I admit it. I ran her off the road. It was stupid and desperate, and I've ruined my life over it. Are you satisfied now?" "Not yet." Titus placed a small recorder on the table, its red light blinking. "But I'm getting there." Damon stared at the device, then back at Titus, understanding the implications. "You recorded my confession. To what end?" "The prosecution already has enough evidence." "Insurance," Titus replied simply. "Against clever attorneys, sympathetic judges, or any other factors that might allow you to escape the full measure of justice." "And what is justice in your mind, Titus?" Damon asked, a strange calm settling over him. "Prison? Financial ruin? My mother's destruction? You've achieved all of that already. What more could you possibly want?" Titus leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to live with the knowledge that you've lost everything, that everyone you care about has suffered because of your actions, and that no matter how much time passes, I will never allow you to rebuild or recover." He stood. "This is just the beginning, Damon, not the end." As Titus turned to leave, Damon called after him, an edge of desperation in his voice. "Wait, what about Cassandra? She wasn't even in the car that day. It was just me. She had nothing to do with what happened to Natalie." Titus paused at the door, looking back with cold eyes. "That's not what Natalie remembers. She's confused. She was badly injured. Cassandra was at a showing across town when it happened." "An interesting revision to your story," Titus noted. "But it doesn't matter now. The evidence says otherwise." Damon's expression twisted with a mixture of rage and realization. "You manipulated Natalie's memories. You fabricated evidence against Cassandra. Your confession is all that matters," Titus replied. "Everything else is just perspective." As he left the detention center, Titus felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only the cold certainty that justice was being served piece by calculated piece. The house of cards Damon and Cassandra had built was collapsing, precisely as he had designed it. And the final collapse was yet to come. Chapter 8. Point of No Return. The recording of Damon's confession, including his claim that Cassandra wasn't present during the attack on Natalie, found its way to the prosecution the morning of the preliminary hearing. This new evidence created immediate complications. The prosecution requested a delay to reconcile the conflicting accounts, while defense attorneys for both Damon and Cassandra pounced on the discrepancy as evidence of a flawed investigation. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. Cassandra sobbed openly at Damon's apparent exoneration of her involvement. Her attorney immediately filed for dismissal of charges and release on bail, arguing that the entire case had been built on manipulated testimony and circumstantial evidence. In the gallery, Titus observed the proceedings with an expression of appropriate concern and confusion. Natalie sat beside him, still frail, but determined to face the people who had harmed her. When questioned by the judge about her identification of Cassandra in the vehicle, she became distressed and uncertain. "I thought I saw her, but everything happened so fast. The doctors said my memories might be affected by the trauma." This apparent weakness in the star witness's testimony, combined with Damon's confession clearing Cassandra, led the judge to grant bail for Cassandra pending further investigation. Damon, having confessed to the actual crime, remained in custody with his financial charges still intact. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Titus and Natalie. He shielded her from their questions, offering only a brief statement. We trust the justice system to determine the truth. Our focus remains on Natalie's recovery. But as they drove away, Titus's expression hardened. This development had been anticipated. In fact, it was an integral part of his design. Cassandra's temporary freedom was necessary for what came next. That evening, Cassandra returned to the house she'd shared with Titus for 20 years, now legally hers through the divorce settlement. Surveillance showed her moving cautiously through the rooms, jumping at shadows, drinking heavily to calm her nerves. She made several calls to her attorney, to friends who largely didn't answer, and finally, tearfully, to her sister in Oregon. "I don't know what to do, Beth. Damon confessed to everything, said I wasn't even there, but they still think I was involved somehow. Are you safe there? What about Titus? He's staying at some hotel, focusing on Natalie. God, Beth, you should see her. She looks so broken, and I can't even talk to her. Her doctors won't let me near her. Maybe you should come here for a while, just until things settle down. I can't leave the state, bail conditions. And all my assets are frozen except for the house. Everything's falling apart." Titus listened to this conversation from his hotel room, a cold sense of satisfaction settling over him. Cassandra was isolated, frightened, and desperate, exactly as he had planned. The next phase required precise timing and execution. Vincent had arranged for a chance meeting between Cassandra and a sympathetic journalist eager for an exclusive interview with the wrongfully accused wife. The story that emerged portrayed Cassandra as a victim of circumstance, a woman betrayed not only by her lover, but by a vengeful husband determined to destroy her regardless of her innocence. Public opinion began to shift slightly in her favor. Online comments questioned Titus's motivations, speculated about his involvement in framing Cassandra, and suggested the entire case might be a sophisticated revenge plot rather than justice for Natalie. Titus welcomed this narrative. It served his purpose perfectly. Meanwhile, he continued to support Natalie's recovery, arranging for her transfer to a specialized rehabilitation facility with round-the-clock security. Her progress accelerated in this new environment, away from the stress of the legal proceedings and media attention. 2 weeks after Cassandra's release on bail, Titus initiated the final sequence of his plan. A carefully edited version of the surveillance recordings from his home was anonymously delivered to Detective Bryant. Footage showing Cassandra and Damon discussing Natalie's accident in explicit terms that implicated them both, despite Damon's later confession claiming sole responsibility. Bryant called Titus immediately. "Where did this come from? And why am I just seeing it now?" "I installed security cameras after Natalie's accident," Titus explained. "I reviewed the footage occasionally, but hadn't gone through all of it. When I heard about Damon's confession clearing Cassandra, I decided to check more thoroughly." "This contradicts his confession," Bryant noted skeptically. "Why would he protect her now after they've both been arrested? Perhaps he still loves her. Or perhaps he believes taking full responsibility might result in leniency for himself." Titus paused. "Or maybe he's planning something more sinister." "What do you mean?" "Cassandra controls significant assets through the divorce settlement, including access to offshore accounts we haven't yet located. If Damon takes the fall alone, she remains free to use those resources for both of them later." Brian considered this. "I'll need to authenticate this footage before taking any action. Of course, I provided the original files with metadata intact. The carefully constructed footage passed forensic analysis, as Titus had ensured it would. Within days, the prosecution filed motions to revoke Cassandra's bail based on this new evidence. A hearing was scheduled for the following week. Titus monitored Cassandra closely during this period. Her initial relief at being released had given way to paranoia and fear as public opinion whipsawed between sympathy and condemnation. She rarely left the house, ordered groceries delivered, and continued drinking heavily. The night before the bail hearing, Titus executed the most dangerous component of his plan. Using a series of burner phones, he sent Cassandra a text message that appeared to be from Damon. "They have new evidence against both of us. We need to leave tonight. I've arranged everything. Pack essentials and wait for instructions." Surveillance showed Cassandra's frantic response, her hesitation, and ultimately her decision to pack a small bag. Hours later, another text directed her to drive to an isolated lakeside cabin owned by one of Damon's shell companies, a property the authorities had not yet discovered. As expected, she violated her bail conditions and fled, driving through the night to reach the remote location by dawn. What she didn't know was that Detective Bryant's team was tracking her movements, alerted by an anonymous tip about her escape plans. But they were intentionally given a slightly delayed timeline, enough for Titus to reach the cabin first. When Cassandra arrived, exhausted and terrified, she found the cabin dark and apparently empty. She called out for Damon as she entered, receiving no response. Then she saw Titus sitting in a chair in the shadowed corner of the main room. "Hello, Cassandra," he said quietly. She froze, one hand still on the doorknob. "Titus? Where's Damon?" "Damon is exactly where he belongs, in jail. He never sent those messages." Understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by fear. "You set me up. You made me violate bail. I merely presented an opportunity. You made the choice to run, just like you made the choice to betray me, to have an affair with Damon, to sit beside him while he ran our daughter off the road." "I wasn't there," she cried. "I swear to God, Titus, I wasn't in the car that day. The surveillance footage suggests otherwise." Her expression shifted from fear to confusion. "What footage?" "There was no footage. The recordings from our home. You and Damon discussing what happened. How you were both there, how you left Natalie to die." Titus stood slowly. "Very damning evidence." "That's impossible." Her voice shook. "We never had that conversation because I wasn't there." "Perhaps not physically," Titus conceded, "but you were complicit. You knew what Damon planned to do. You did nothing to stop him. And afterward, you helped him cover it up. In the eyes of the law, that makes you equally guilty." Cassandra backed toward the door. "You falsified evidence against me. You manipulated Natalie's memories. This whole thing has been a setup from the beginning. And yet here you are, fleeing justice, violating bail, proving your consciousness of guilt." He took a step toward her. "The authorities will be here within 20 minutes. I told them you might be armed and dangerous. Why are you doing this?" Tears streamed down her face. "I know I hurt you. The affair was wrong. But I never would have harmed Natalie. She's my daughter too. You stopped being her mother the moment you chose Damon over her safety." Titus's voice remained eerily calm. "Now you have a choice. Stay and face arrest for violating bail, which will almost certainly result in your being held until trial, where the fabricated evidence will ensure your conviction. Or," he gestured toward the back door, "there's a boat at the dock. Lake Michigan is just 50 yards that way. Canada is approximately 50 miles across the water." Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by suspicion. "Why would you give me an escape route?" "Perhaps I believe the justice system is too lenient for what you've done. Perhaps I prefer knowing you'll spend the rest of your life as a fugitive, always looking over your shoulder, never able to use your real name or contact anyone you love." He checked his watch. 17 minutes now. Decision time, Cassandra. She hesitated only briefly before bolting for the back door. Titus made no move to stop her. Through the window, he watched as she ran awkwardly down the dock in her inappropriate shoes and climbed into the small motorboat. Within moments, she was accelerating away from shore, heading out across the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. What she didn't know, what no one knew except Titus, was that the boat had been carefully modified. The fuel gauge showed a full tank, but in reality, it contained just enough gasoline to reach approximately 20 miles offshore. The radio had been disabled, the emergency beacon removed, and small, strategically placed holes had been drilled in the hull, patched with a compound designed to dissolve gradually in water. By the time authorities arrived at the cabin, finding only Titus waiting calmly on the porch, Cassandra was a distant speck on the horizon. "I tried to stop her," he explained to Detective Bryant. "She was hysterical, said she was meeting Damon, that they had it all planned. When I threatened to call you, she ran for the boat. I'm not a strong swimmer. I couldn't follow her into the water." Bryant surveyed the scene skeptically. "How did you know she'd be here?" "I've been monitoring her since her release. When I saw her packing intercepted texts about meeting Damon, I got worried. Followed her here, but arrived just minutes before you did. A Coast Guard search was immediately launched, but the vastness of Lake Michigan and worsening weather conditions hampered efforts. By nightfall, the search was expanded to include Canadian authorities, but hope of finding Cassandra diminished with each passing hour. 3 days later, debris from the boat was discovered floating approximately 30 miles offshore. Among the wreckage was Cassandra's purse containing her identification and a handwritten note that had been partially damaged by water. What remained legible appeared to be a confession of guilt and remorse, though key details were conveniently obscured by water damage. The official search was called off after a week. Cassandra Mercer was presumed dead, another victim of Lake Michigan's unpredictable and often deadly waters. Titus received the news with appropriate gravity, expressing regret that Natalie would never have the closure of seeing her mother face justice. Privately, he knew that justice had indeed been served, not by courts or prisons, but by his own precisely executed design. The path of destruction was complete. Damon Ravelli would spend decades in prison. Eleanor Ravelli faced her own legal battles, her reputation and fortune in ruins. And Cassandra, whether she had truly drowned in the vast waters of Lake Michigan or somehow survived to live as a fugitive, would never again know peace or security. Titus had promised his daughter he would save her from those who had harmed her, and in his own cold, meticulous way, he had fulfilled that promise. The architect of pain had completed his masterwork. Chapter 9. Ashes and Steel. 1 year later, Titus stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Natalie Mercer Marine Research Center, watching as his daughter guided a group of high school students through the facility's interactive exhibits. At 20, she showed few physical signs of her traumatic injuries, just a slight limp that emerged when she was tired and occasional headaches that her doctors assured would continue to diminish with time. The psychological scars ran deeper. Nightmares still disrupted her sleep, and she remained uncomfortable in cars, especially on winding roads. But her passion for marine biology had returned stronger than before, fueled partly by her determination to reclaim her life and partly by the center Titus had built in her name, a state-of-the-art research facility dedicated to studying and preserving the Great Lakes ecosystem. The center stood on the very riverfront property that Damon had once coveted, land that had never actually been contaminated, but had been tied up in environmental investigations for months until Titus quietly arranged for experts to declare it clean. He had used his own resources to fund the center, creating a living legacy for Natalie and ensuring the land would never be developed for private profit. Vincent joined him at the railing, his presence unusual in daylight hours. They had maintained a careful distance over the past year, meeting only occasionally and always discreetly. "Impressive place," Vincent commented, nodding toward the gleaming building with its sustainable design and panoramic views of the water. "Something good built from something terrible." Titus said nothing, his gaze fixed on Natalie as she enthusiastically explained a display on invasive species to the attentive students. "Any word?" he asked finally. Vincent understood the question. Nothing definitive. There was a possible sighting in a small fishing village in Newfoundland 3 months ago. Woman matching her description, working as a waitress. By the time my contact got there, she was gone. He paused. If it was her, she's living on borrowed time. No money, no identity, constantly moving. That's no life at all. It's more than she deserves, Titus replied coldly. Vincent studied his friend's profile. Damon's appeal was denied last week. He'll serve the full 30 years. I know. His mother pled guilty to reduced charges. Part of a deal to avoid trial. She'll lose most of her assets, serve maybe 5 years. Also insufficient, but acceptable. Vincent hesitated, then asked the question that had bothered him for months. The boat, Titus, was it designed to sink quickly or slowly? Titus finally turned to face him. Does it matter? Either way, she's gone. It matters to you, whether you gave her a fighting chance or ensured she had none. For a long moment, Titus was silent, his expression unreadable. Then, the boat was designed to take on water gradually, approximately 20 miles offshore. In ideal conditions, with a strong swimmer, there was perhaps a 10% chance of survival. His voice was clinically detached. I didn't directly take her life. I simply arranged circumstances where her survival was unlikely. Vincent nodded slowly. And if she did survive, if she's out there somewhere, then she lives as a ghost, unable to contact anyone from her past, always looking over her shoulder, knowing that one wrong move will send her to prison for the rest of her life. A cold smile touched Titus's lips. In some ways, that's a more fitting punishment than death. Below them, Natalie had finished with the student group and was looking up, waving for her father to join her. Titus raised a hand in acknowledgement. She still doesn't know, does she? Vincent asked quietly. About what you did, what you arranged. She knows I ensured that justice was served. Titus straightened his tie. The details would only burden her. And you? Are you burdened by them? Titus considered the question with genuine reflection. No, he said finally. I made a promise to protect my daughter from those who harmed her. I kept that promise. Everything else is collateral consequence. Vincent sighed. The man I knew 15 years ago would have seen things differently. That man died the moment he heard his daughter whisper, "Save me," in that hospital room. Titus turned away from the view. I should join Natalie. We're unveiling the new research vessel this afternoon. As he moved toward the stairs, Vincent called after him. Just tell me one thing. If you had it to do over, knowing everything it would cost, everything you would become, would you do it again? Exactly the same way. Titus paused, looking back over his shoulder. Without hesitation, he answered, his voice like steel. I would burn the world to ashes if it meant keeping my promise to her. Then he descended the stairs to join his daughter, leaving Vincent alone with the weight of those words and the understanding that the Titus Mercer he had once known was truly gone. In his place stood something harder and colder. A man who had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed, who had calculated the value of human lives and found some wanting. The reckoning was complete, but its cost had been measured not just in the lives destroyed, but in the soul of the destroyer himself. Later that evening, as Titus and Natalie stood on the deck of the research vessel bearing her name, she asked the question she had avoided for months. Do you ever think about Mom? About what happened to her? Titus kept his eyes on the horizon, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of fire. Sometimes. Do you think she's really dead? Or do you think she might have survived somehow? The authorities were thorough in their search, he replied carefully. But Lake Michigan is vast. Some questions may never have definitive answers. Natalie was quiet for a moment, then, if she is somehow alive out there, I hope she stays away. Is that terrible of me to say? No, sweetheart. It's honest. She made her choice, Natalie said, an echo of hardness entering her voice that reminded Titus uncomfortably of himself. She chose him over us. Over me. I can't forgive that. Titus put his arm around her shoulders, feeling the steel beneath her apparent fragility. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, he agreed. Some debts can only be paid in full. They stood together as darkness fell, father and daughter united by trauma and its aftermath, by justice delivered through methodical destruction, by a reckoning that had changed them both irrevocably. Behind them, the research center glowed with light and purpose, a beacon built upon the ashes of what had been destroyed. And somewhere, perhaps across cold waters or distant borders, the ghosts of their past carried the weight of a punishment more precise and unforgiving than any court could have delivered. The architect had completed his design, and it would stand as his legacy, a monument to the truth that Titus Mercer had embraced in that hospital room 1 year ago. Some men forgive, others forget, but a father who truly loves his child will do neither when that child is harmed. Instead, he will become the reckoning itself, patient, precise, and utterly without mercy. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.